The sound of the deadbolt sliding home hit different than any sound I'd heard before. It wasn't loud, just a metallic click, but it echoed in my chest like a gunshot. I stood on the front porch, my hand still raised from knocking, frost already forming on my eyelashes. Through the frosted glass panel, I watched my father's silhouette turn away, not quickly, like he was angry, slowly, like he was following instructions. The porch light stayed on. That somehow made it worse. They wanted me to see what they were doing. My stepmother, Victoria, stood in the hallway behind him, her arms crossed, her face a mask of satisfaction even through the distorted glass. My stepbrother, Blake, appeared beside her, and I swear to God he was smiling. The Minneapolis cold at 30 below zero doesn't creep. It attacks. Within seconds, my lungs burned with each breath. My fingers started going numb inside my gloves. I had a backpack with 3 changes of clothes, my laptop, and $152 in cash. Everything else I owned was inside that house. Everything except my dignity, apparently, because they'd just thrown that out with me. My name is Kayla. I'm 18 years old, and until tonight, I thought I knew what abandonment felt like. This is the story of how I learned the difference between being left behind and being erased. I turned 18 exactly 6 hours ago. No cake, no celebration, just a curt, happy birthday from Victoria at breakfast, and a look from my father that I couldn't quite read. I should have known something was coming. Victoria had been too quiet lately, too controlled. For weeks, she'd stopped with the passive-aggressive comments and the strategic criticisms. I thought maybe she was finally backing off. I was an idiot. The trust fund. My grandfather's trust fund. That's what this was about. It unlocked when I turned 18, and I was supposed to sign the release papers next week. $240,000. Not a fortune, but enough to pay for college, enough to start a life. My grandfather had set it up specifically for me after my mom died, with explicit instructions that only I could access it. I stood on that porch for maybe 30 seconds, my brain trying to process what was happening before survival instinct kicked in. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't bang on the door and beg. The cold would kill me before their conscience woke up, assuming they had one. I started walking. The abandoned garden shed 3 blocks away had been my hiding spot since Victoria moved in 5 years ago. It wasn't much, just a rotting wooden structure behind a foreclosed house, but it was shelter. I'd stashed an old sleeping bag there last summer, some emergency supplies. It would keep me alive until morning. That's when the hand grabbed my wrist from the shadows. I jerked back, nearly slipping on the ice, but the grip was iron tight. A figure stepped into the circle of streetlight. Ruth, the homeless woman who lived on the corner. I'd given her my lunch money a few times, helped her find the warming shelter during cold snaps. She was probably in her 60s, with wild gray hair and layers of worn coats, but her eyes were sharp. Right now, they were wide with terror. "Do not sleep in that shed tonight," she said, her voice urgent and clear. "Get a hotel room. If you go back there, you won't wake up." "What are you talking about?" My teeth were already starting to chatter. "Just trust me. The Starlight Motel 2 blocks west. Go now." She pressed something into my hand, a crumpled $20 bill. "Add it to what you have. Get inside. Get warm. Don't go to that shed." I wanted to argue, to ask questions, but the cold was already seeping through my coat. I nodded and started walking toward the motel's flickering neon sign in the distance. Behind me, Ruth disappeared back into the shadows. The motel lobby smelled like cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. The desk clerk barely glanced up from his phone when I approached, and I was grateful for his indifference. I didn't want to explain why an 18-year-old girl was checking in alone at midnight with nothing but a backpack. $43, he said flatly. Cash only. Checkouts at 11 a.m. I counted out the bills with numb fingers and took the key to room 12. The room was barely warmer than outside. I cranked the ancient heater until it rattled and wheezed, filling the air with the smell of burning dust. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my coat, and waited for the shaking to stop. It wasn't just from the cold anymore. This was the moment I was supposed to fall apart. This was when the tears should come, when I'd collapse under the weight of being rejected by my own father. But my eyes stayed dry. I stared at the water-stained ceiling and felt something else instead, a cold, crystallizing clarity. I'd spent 5 years making excuses for my father, Marcus, telling myself he was weak, that Victoria controlled him, that deep down he still loved me and was just too beaten down to show it. I told myself he was a victim too, trapped in a marriage with a woman who demanded absolute obedience. Tonight proved I was wrong. He wasn't trapped. He was complicit. Weakness is passive. What he'd done was active. He'd calculated the cost of defending me against Victoria's rage and decided it was too high. He'd watched his only daughter get locked out into a blizzard that could kill me in hours, and he'd made his choice. The door hadn't locked itself. He'd turned that deadbolt with his own hand. I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from my best friend Nina, 2 texts asking if I was okay. I sent her a quick message. "I'm safe. Long story. We'll explain tomorrow." Then I realized Ruth might need to reach me. I sent another text to Nina asking her to give Ruth my number if she saw her, along with the motel address. After that, I turned off my phone to save the battery. I wedged the desk chair under the door handle and lay down on the bed fully clothed. I didn't sleep exactly. I just waited, my mind turning over Ruth's warning again and again. Why had she been so terrified? What did she know about that shed? Tomorrow I'd find out. The sun hadn't fully risen when I arrived at the 24-hour diner on Franklin Avenue. Ruth had called me an hour earlier through Nina, suggesting we meet there. She was already nursing a cup of black coffee that looked like it had been sitting there for an hour, but her eyes were alert. When I slid into the booth across from her, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I used to be a legal secretary," she said. Her voice was raspy from years on the street, but her words were precise. 30 years at Hennepin and Associates. I know how people hide things, and I know how they get sloppy. She pulled out a battered tablet from her coat. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. She set it on the table between us and pressed play. The video was grainy night vision footage, the kind from a cheap trail camera. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. last night, about 45 minutes after I'd been locked out. The view showed the garden shed, its boarded-up windows barely visible in the darkness. A figure entered the frame. My stomach dropped. Blake. My stepbrother was carrying a shovel. I watched, my coffee growing cold in my hands as he started piling snow against the shed door, not clearing it, packing it, heavy, wet snow, layer after layer, banking it against the door until it formed a solid wall. He worked methodically, checking the boarded windows, making sure every possible exit was sealed. Then he stopped. He stood there, looking at the shed where he thought I was sleeping, and he laughed. It was a short, satisfied sound, the sound of someone who'd solved a problem. He pulled out his phone, typed something, and walked away. The video ended. I stared at the black screen, my hands gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. "If you'd been in there," Ruth said quietly. "The temperature's supposed to hit 35 below tonight. With the door blocked and no airflow." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "That wasn't an eviction," she continued. "That was an attempt to take your life." My throat felt tight. "How did you know? How did you have a camera there?" "I've been watching your family for 3 months," Ruth said. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving mine. "Ever since I overheard Victoria and Blake talking outside the grocery store. They thought I was just another invisible homeless person, not worth lowering their voices around. Victoria said something about dealing with the girl before the trust activates. When I heard you sometimes went to that shed, I put the camera there just in case. I've been tracking them ever since." "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do that for me?" Ruth's expression softened slightly. "Because 30 years ago, I had a daughter. She got caught between me and my second husband when their trust fund came due. He convinced me she was the problem. By the time I figured out what he was really doing, she was gone. Restraining order, moved across the country. I lost everything trying to make it up to her. My job, my house, my sanity." She tapped the tablet. "I'm not losing another girl to a family that values money over blood." I couldn't breathe. "Blake tried to end my life." "Yes, for the trust fund. If you pass away before you sign the release, it goes to your father. If you're just missing, they can petition for access after 7 years. But if you freeze in an abandoned shed after running away on your 18th birthday," Ruth's mouth twisted, Tragic accident. No investigation. Clean inheritance. The rage that filled me then wasn't hot. It was ice cold and absolutely clear. I looked at Ruth across the scarred diner table. We're going to the police, and then I'm going to make sure they don't see a penny of that money. Ruth smiled, thin and sharp. That's my girl. Let's go bury them. The 4th Precinct station smelled like burned coffee and floor wax. Detective Miller looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Salt and pepper hair, permanent 5 o'clock shadow, eyes that had seen too much. But those eyes sharpened considerably as he watched Ruth's video. He played it twice. The second time, he leaned forward, studying Blake's face on the screen. Attempted manslaughter at minimum, Miller said, leaning back in his chair. Probably more once we dig into it. This is premeditation. He brought tools, checked for exits, blocked everything systematically. He looked at me. You're sure you want to pursue this? This is your brother. Stepbrother, I corrected. And yes, he tried to end my life. Miller nodded. We'll pick him up within the hour. I'll need you to write out a full statement. Everything that happened last night. Everything leading up to it. He paused. What about your stepmother? Do you think she knew? She locked me out, I said. She's the one who made my father do it. But the video only shows your stepbrother. We can question him about her involvement, but right now the warrant is just for Blake. Miller's expression was sympathetic but firm. One step at a time. They arrested Blake before lunch. I should have felt safer. Instead, a tight knot of anxiety formed in my stomach that only grew worse as the afternoon wore on. My phone buzzed at 3 p.m. unknown number. Come home and sign the papers, Kayla, or the cold won't be the only thing that hurts you. I bailed him out. He's angry. I stared at the message, ice flooding my veins. Victoria had used the family accounts, technically my trust accounts, to bail out the person who'd tried to end my life. She wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. She's escalating, Ruth said, reading over my shoulder. We were back at the motel, and I'd been pacing for the last hour. This is what psychologists call an extinction burst. When a behavior that used to work suddenly stops working, people don't just quit. They amplify. They scream louder, push harder, get more desperate. But she knows the police are involved. She knows there's evidence. She also knows the deadline, Ruth said grimly. You turned 18 yesterday. The trust paperwork has to be signed within 72 hours, or it goes into temporary probate while the court sorts it out. That gives them an opening to contest it, claim you're mentally unfit, drag it out in legal fees until there's nothing left. She looked at me seriously. Victoria's controlled everything, your father, your life, the money for 5 years. Now it's all slipping away. She's not thinking rationally anymore. She's a cornered animal. My phone buzzed again. Email notification. Account frozen. Then another. Access denied. Victoria was systematically locking me out of every account, every small financial foothold I had. She was trying to starve me out, force me to come crawling back. Then the social media notifications started. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree, texts from old high school friends, people I hadn't talked to in months. Is this true? Are you okay? I had no idea. Do you need help? Your mom is saying you're on drugs? I opened Facebook with shaking hands. Victoria had posted a long, tearful plea, tagged with my name and photo. Please help us find our daughter, Kayla. She's had a mental breakdown and we're terrified for her safety. If anyone sees her, please don't approach. She may be dangerous. Call us immediately. We just want to bring our baby home. The post had 200 likes already. Dozens of comments from neighbors and family friends, all offering sympathy, all believing every word. She's brilliant, I said numbly. She's making sure no one believes me before I can even tell my side. Ruth took the phone from my hands and set it down. Let her play her games. She's fighting with rumors and Facebook posts. We're going to fight with paperwork and legal precedent. How? Tomorrow morning, we go to the bank. We don't wear hoodies and backpacks. We dress like you own the place. Ruth pulled a garment bag from her duffel. Because you're about to. The First National Bank downtown opened at 9 a.m. sharp. I walked through those glass doors wearing Ruth's borrowed black blazer and the one nice blouse I owned, my hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. I looked like I belonged there. I looked like money. Ruth walked beside me in her worn coat, but she'd cleaned up. Hair brushed, face washed. She looked less like a homeless woman and more like someone's eccentric aunt. Appearances matter, and we were here to win. "I'm here to see Mr. Foster," I told the receptionist, "senior trustee for the Brennan estate." The receptionist's eyes flicked over my outfit, trying to reconcile my age with my confidence. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need one. I'm the beneficiary, and today's the last day to sign." I slid my ID and birth certificate across her desk. "He'll want to see me." Before she could respond, the glass doors behind us opened. I knew without turning around. The air in the lobby changed, charged with hostility. "Oh, Kayla." Victoria's voice cut through the quiet space. She strode toward me, flanked by my father and a man in an ill-fitting suit who had to be a lawyer. Victoria looked immaculate as always. Designer coat, perfect makeup, but her eyes were frantic. "Thank God we found you. We've been so worried." She rushed forward with her arms open, the concerned mother playing to perfection. My father hung back, staring at the marble floor. "Stop." I didn't shout. I didn't even raise my voice. I just held up one hand and Victoria froze mid-step. "Don't touch me." "Honey, please, you're not well. Let's go home and talk about this. The trust can wait." "Call Mr. Foster," I said to the receptionist, without breaking eye contact with Victoria. "Right now." The lawyer stepped forward, briefcase in hand. "Miss Brennan, I represent your parents. Given your recent behavior and the concerns about your mental state, they're petitioning for temporary conservatorship. You're in no condition to make major financial decisions." "She's perfectly lucid," Ruth said sharply. "And unless you have a court order declaring her incompetent, which you don't, or you would have led with that, she has every legal right to be here. Now back off before I have security remove you for harassment." The lawyer blinked, clearly not expecting a homeless woman to quote legal procedure with that much precision. Before he could respond, the elevator dinged. A gray-haired man in an expensive suit stepped out. His eyes swept the scene. Me, Victoria, the lawyer, Ruth, before settling on the ID sitting on the reception desk. "Miss Brennan?" he asked. "That's me. Peter Foster, senior trustee. I've been expecting you." He looked at Victoria with cool professional distance. "Mrs. Brennan." "Mr. Foster, you can't let her sign anything," Victoria said, her voice rising slightly. "She's not stable. She's been living on the streets. She's—" "Mrs. Brennan," Foster interrupted. "The terms of the trust are explicit and legally binding. The beneficiary turns 18, she signs, the funds transfer. Unless you have a court order declaring her mentally incompetent, this transaction proceeds as planned." He paused. "Do you have such an order?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed. The lawyer shifted his briefcase uncomfortably. They had nothing but threats and manipulations, and those didn't work on bank lawyers who dealt with estate law every day. "I didn't think so," Foster said. He gestured toward the elevator. "Miss Brennan, shall we?" As the elevator doors closed, I watched Victoria's careful mask finally crack. The concern evaporated, replaced by something raw and desperate. She knew. It was over. Foster's office was all dark wood and leather chairs. He laid out the documents on his massive desk, page after page of legalese that basically said, "The money is yours. Sign here." I read every word. Ruth sat beside me, occasionally pointing out specific clauses, her legal secretary training evident in every comment. When I was satisfied, I picked up the pen. The signatures felt like freedom. Kayla Brennan, Kayla Brennan, Kayla Brennan. Each one was a nail in Victoria's coffin. "There's one more matter," Foster said after I'd signed the final page. He pulled out a thick sealed envelope. "Your grandfather added a codicil to the trust a week before he died, a negligence liability clause." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means your grandfather was a very perceptive man." Foster opened the envelope, spreading documents across the desk. He stipulated that if you were ever found to be in a state of distress or danger caused by your guardians, the trust would automatically fund a private investigation and legal prosecution against them. My breath caught. He knew? He suspected. He couldn't prove anything while he was alive, but he made sure you'd have the resources to do it after. Foster slid a document toward me. Inside were bank statements showing Victoria's excessive spending, itemized lists of my trust funds being used for her personal expenses, and a retainer agreement for one of the state's top criminal prosecution firms. By attempting to harm you, Foster said quietly, they triggered the clause. The estate isn't just yours, Miss Brennan. It's now the war chest that will put them in prison. He looked at me seriously. The retainer is already paid. The firm is ready to proceed whenever you give the word. Do you want to initiate prosecution? I looked at Ruth. She gave me a small, fierce nod. Yes, I said. Proceed immediately. One more thing, I added. The subsidiary accounts, the ones my father and Victoria use for expenses, the credit cards, the house account, everything. Foster nodded. The allowance cards, yes. What about them? Freeze them, all of them. Cancel every card, close every account they have access to. As of right now, they don't touch another penny of this money. Foster typed several commands into his computer. Done. They're completely locked out. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Thank you, Mr. Foster. Thank your grandfather, he said. He made sure you'd be protected. A week later, I stood in the doorway of my new apartment. It was small, a studio with old hardwood floors and big windows that let in the pale February sunlight. The furniture was secondhand, the kitchen barely qualified as a kitchenette, but it was warm, it was safe, it was mine. Ruth had moved into the spare room at Nina's place, finally off the streets. Nina's family had welcomed her with open arms once they understood she'd saved my life. She was working part-time at their family law office now, putting her legal secretary skills back to use. The legal proceedings had moved quickly once the evidence came to light. Blake was sentenced to 3 years in juvenile detention for attempted manslaughter with a negligence clause. He'd be eligible for parole in 18 months with good behavior. Victoria had tried to flee the state, but was arrested at the airport with a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. She was awaiting trial on charges of conspiracy to commit manslaughter, embezzlement, and fraud. As for my father, the prosecution determined he was complicit, but offered him a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Victoria. 2 years of probation and mandatory counseling. He took it without hesitation. A knock on the door made me look up from unpacking. I checked the peephole and went still. My father stood in the hallway. He looked like he'd aged a decade in a week. His coat was thin and worn, not the expensive wool one he used to wear. His face was gray with stubble, his eyes hollow. He was shivering. I opened the door but didn't step back. I blocked the entrance, one hand on the frame. It's Kayla. His voice cracked. Can I come in? It's cold out here. I know, I said. He looked past me into the apartment, and I saw the calculation in his eyes, the warmth, the safety, the space I'd claimed without him. We lost the house, he said. The trust foreclosed on the mortgage. Victoria's in custody awaiting trial. Blake's in juvenile detention serving his sentence. He swallowed hard. I have nowhere to go. Okay, I said. Kayla, please. His voice broke. I'm your father. You can't just... Family is supposed to stick together. I didn't know it would go this far. I thought you'd be okay. You're smart. You're resourceful. You thought what, exactly? I kept my voice level. That I'd find a friend's couch, that I'd forgive you, that freezing to death was an acceptable risk as long as Victoria stayed happy? I made a mistake. You made a choice. I cut him off. You stood there and watched Blake trap me in that shed to die. You turned that deadbolt knowing what Victoria and Blake were planning. You weren't confused or tricked. You calculated the cost of protecting me against the cost of Victoria's anger, and you chose your comfort over my life. I'm still your father. His eyes were wet now, desperate. You can't just abandon me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key. It was old, rusted, the key to the garden shed. I'd taken it from the property before the foreclosure went through. I held it out to him. There's a shed 3 blocks from here, I said. Abandoned property. The foreclosure notice hasn't been posted yet. The door locks from the inside now. I made sure of that. There's even a sleeping bag, some bottled water. You'll be fine for a few nights until you figure something out. His hand shook as he looked at the key. Kayla, you can't. The temperature's supposed to drop to 20 below tonight, I continued. But the shed has 4 walls and a roof. That's more than you gave me. I'm your father. It was almost a whisper now. You were my father, I corrected. Now you're just someone who made a really bad investment. I pressed the key into his hand and stepped back. Be inside before sunset, I said. The cold's no joke. He stared at the key like it was a snake. Then he looked up at me, and I saw the moment he understood. This wasn't cruelty. This was symmetry. This was him learning what it felt like to be considered disposable. Kayla, please. I closed the door. The sound of the lock clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. Final. Just. Earned. Inside, Nina was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup that smelled like tomatoes and basil. Ruth sat in the armchair by the window, reading a battered paperback. Was that him? Ruth asked without looking up. Yeah. Is he gone? He's gone. I walked to the window. Outside, the snow was melting in patches where the sun hit the sidewalk. Spring would come eventually. The city would thaw. I later learned he used the shed for 2 nights before checking himself into a homeless shelter. He completed his probation and eventually moved to another state, though we never spoke again. I heard through extended family that he found work as a janitor and rented a small efficiency apartment. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd given me that night. Ruth closed her book and looked at me. You know he'll tell people you're heartless, cold, ungrateful. Let him, I said. I sat down on the floor, the sunlight warming my face for the first time in what felt like forever. I spent 18 years trying to earn love from people who saw me as a transaction. I'm done negotiating my worth. Good, Nina said from the kitchen. She brought over 3 bowls of soup, and we ate together in comfortable silence. For the first time in 18 years, I wasn't cold. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't calculating how to make myself small enough to deserve basic kindness. I was home. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, 0 cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.